Hello, my name is Donna Anthony, and welcome to the Point Blank Podcast. My background is law enforcement, and I'm also the owner of Point Blank Firearms and Self-Defense Training. Our podcast is really about family, faith, and firearms. Tonight, my guest speaker is going to be Dr. Lewis Day. I'm very excited that he's with us. Lewis has a new book out. It's called Fighting Words. We'll get into the details of how you can get that. In addition about Lewis Day, he just moved here to Alaska, and he has joined the Point Blank Firearms and Self-Defense Training team. He's an instructor from out of state and will be joining us. And in addition, Lewis is working on a new course that we're really excited about here in Alaska. I think a lot of people are going to come to this course. It's different, and especially what's happening in our community right now and basically in society. The new course you're going to be talking about will be the foundation that built our U.S. Constitution. We're going to add that to our firearms courses. So we'll get into that. Dr. Lewis, thank you very much for joining us. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Let the audience get to know you a little bit better, especially our Alaskans, and what got you into eventually the whole process to get you to this book?
Well, first of all, Donna, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a privilege, and I thank you for that. I grew up in probably unusual circumstances for being a white Caucasian male. And that was in northern New Mexico. And during the time that I was there, my parents were missionaries. And the missionary status was there because of what was going on during that part of northern New Mexico. It was a land grant war. And so I grew up as a white Caucasian among Native Americans and among Hispanic people. And I was the only pale looking person around for a while. And so, in fact, I didn't know I was white until I was like 6 years old. But I grew up with, tanks rolling through my front yard, military people. It really was a war. Rumors of assassinations, tortures. And so as a young boy growing up in that era and into my teen years, it really set the backdrop for me to think about what is right, what is wrong, what is justice, what is law, who gets to say who, what, when. And so that led me eventually into all my education years as a pastor to end up studying the U.S. Constitution and its Judeo-Christian backgrounds.
Wow. What year was that? I don't know how we have this background, but this is information I've never heard about growing up as a kid about tanks on the U.S. side coming through. Is that? Can you get me?
Yes, it was United States troops. It was an insurrection of sorts, an illegal insurrection. I say illegal as the Constitution would see it. There was a group of people that just decided to forego the Constitution of the United States and of New Mexico and go back to treaties of Spain hundreds of years earlier and to try to grab back lands that were deeded from the Spanish king. And they had no real application, just a matter of jealousy and greed, frankly. So that's what happened. In fact, Robert Redford owned some property there, I think consequent to the war. But he actually made a kind of a spoof of the event called the Milagro Beanfield War. Okay. And so if you've ever seen that movie, you can see a little glimpse into what happened back then.
Interesting. I'm sorry about the feedback. I'm not sure what's causing that. But so once you grew up there, where'd you go from there? You got into ministry? Was your father a minister too?
Yes, my father and my mother, they were both missionaries in northern New Mexico. Like I said, usually it started in Ecuador. And they were transplanted back to the U.S. during this era because it was a missionary zone at the time. And so I grew up with that and eventually went to school. Yes, I had leukemia as a young boy, opened my eyes, life and death. I was ready to die at 12 years old because nobody had ever lived from acute lymphocytic leukemia. I'm the first one, medical history, to live from it. And that's a whole story to itself. But that made me think about not just the here and now, about law and justice, but eternal things as well. So I went into ministry, and eventually what happened, here's the story. My son was an exchange student to go to Brazil with the Rotary Club International. And we thought before we sent him off to another country, we'd give him a good old American background education. And so we went to Washington, D.C. and did some tour. Washington, D.C.'s architecture, the history behind it is just fantastic and inspiring as an American, frankly. But we were in the National Archives, looked at the Constitution, went to the gift store. I was planning to do a PhD in medical ethics. And my son grabbed a book and handed it to me from the shelves and said, "Dad, I think this is your sort of thing." And it was on the United States Constitution and the Judeo-Christian background. And suddenly it's flipped there. And I said, okay, PhD, and it's going to be in constitutional law and Christian ethics, basically.
Awesome. That's a great story. So how'd you get into firearms on top of that?
Well, being a minority growing up in northern New Mexico, I learned to fight with my hands and feet and whatever else I had. And so I learned to fight. And so I had this kind of, not really a bully. I was bullied. And so I learned just to protect myself. And so eventually, being in northern New Mexico and being in Texas as a pastor, I became more and more familiar with firearms as a defense mechanism, not just for hunting. And so that all transitioned into my learning more and more, and then becoming an instructor. And so that's what happened. It morphed into that. Yeah, preaching from the pulpit and carrying a firearm, same time. Actually, a very good historical memory of our country. The earliest pastors did wear their weapons in the in the counter-revolution war. King George started the revolution. We simply countered to protect ourselves. And so they would simply wear their military uniforms with their guns. And when it came time, they'd drop their robes and say, "Men, we must fight." And he would lead his congregation out, fight.
Wow. And now you ended up in Colorado after this, right? So when you're in Colorado, you end up opening up a firearms company too? Is that correct?
Well, there's certain things that no matter what, who you are comes out. And so, yes, I've owned different kind of businesses. I've been an entrepreneur. Pastor is being an entrepreneur. I had just simply, I had one of the fastest growing churches in the United States when I was in Texas. Simply went through a burnout. And so when I moved to Colorado, I started opening up different businesses, and all of them were successful. But the whole time I was still gun training, things like that. And eventually what happened is when I went to the whole explosives area, I used to do explosives for looking for water wells, a British petroleum application. It suddenly dawned on me, maybe I should become an instructor. And so I sought out USCCA and underwent their teaching programs and became an instructor, and found out I was training more people in the county I was in Colorado than anybody else. And that was quite the privilege and honor to be able to be in relationship with the sheriff's department and law enforcement in that area.
So here's my question to you. So you've been a pastor and a firearms instructor. Which one's more rewarding?
Yes.
I know. I have to ask it.
It depends, kind of. I can't see really a real dichotomy between the two. Here, you pointed out in my book earlier, Donna, Fighting Words. As I was doing research in scriptures, pastor, theologian, doctor's degree, I discovered that Jesus was no wimp. He had one of his famous statements, and I dare people who hear this podcast, ask your pastor to preach on messages like, "I did not come to bring peace, but war." Things like that. Things that came out like that started making me think that really the Christian faith is a faith that means to make a difference. We're to be a force to be reckoned with for good. We're a force for good. And I saw that throughout scriptures. And so I get a lot of fulfillment, not as a pastor per se anymore. I still teach people who come to my home. We have a fellowship group now that comes to our home. I teach them how to do proper biblical interpretation. So I enjoy that. but I get a real kick, Donna. You've seen it in my eyes.
Mhm.
When I've been out in the range and I see this young girl who can't shoot worth a hoot, I spend 10 minutes with her on the range, and suddenly she's become very adept with the firearm, very good. And she just lights up. I've seen it time after time after time. And so that gives me a great sense of satisfaction that this girl feels a sense of empowerment to take care of herself and her family.
Yep. I asked you that question because as a pastor, it's rewarding. But you look at a firearms instructor and you see how you just you empower somebody, you encourage them, and they could be a victim, but here you are, you're bringing them back up. You're still healing them. Same. Yeah.
That is very true. It's a healing process, and that's well put, Donna, because I never quite tagged it like that, but it's a healing process for the human spirit, male or female.
Yep. Being in law enforcement and a firearms instructor, I have seen evil, because evil exists, and how we can help these people through such traumatic times and make them stronger. So, and not to
I don't know if this will get edited, but you said that, Donna, so you open the doors. As a pastor, I had to work with a lot and as a deputy coroner in my background, I owned a funeral home too. There's a lot of humor in there. But what's not humorous is what I had to see also, the underbelly of humanity and the women and men who have been greatly traumatized by it. And to have them come to healing. I have the example many times of a woman who's been beaten, raped, and she's told she needs to learn how to protect herself. And on the range, eventually, she can't fire a gun. And finally, I'll ask her about some of her background, and then she'll tell me. And I'll simply let them know, now what you're doing is what's good and right for you and before God and before your society and government. Take care of that person that's in front of you causing evil.
Sometimes I need that. Sometimes I need that just little reassurance, though, too, that God is okay with you having a gun and protecting yourself.
Okay, another part in the book, Donna, is I bring out another controversial passage. Is here Jesus is about to die. He knows that, to be crucified and raised from the dead, but he's about to leave his disciples physically alone. For the first time. And so it lets them know, before I told you, don't need to worry about cash. Don't worry about I'll take care of you. But now he knows he's leaving, and his departure message is, and my background is in the original languages of the Bible, Greek and Hebrew. But he turns around and tells them, before I told you this, but now, huge contrast in the grammar. He says, but now, if you got to sell your clothes, get yourself a defensive weapon. Start carrying cash. Start becoming street smart. And so you don't hear too many pastors preaching on that either.
No, you don't. Well, I wanted to touch about, I saw that you have this thesis, and I wanted to see if you can kind of go into this with me. So you have the why behind the fight. Will give you the why behind you must fight. Can you go into that?
Yes. Is what you believe worth dying for and worth living for? We have to have a really solid integrity and character behind us to learn how to defend ourselves or to defend others. And the why behind the fight is a lot of time, especially in the Christian evangelical community, is we don't understand a lot of whys anymore. And so what I go behind is to teach them about the God of the universe. And I don't know if I can use this illustration to come up, but there's only two ways to look at the world. It's this: everything exists in this box. This is the entire universe. We open up the box, and what do we see? Oh my goodness, let's see. There's Hitler. There's Ronald Reagan. There's me, and there's you, and we all see all of world history in this box. That's all that exists. Who's to say within that box what's right and wrong? There's nobody to say. It's whoever has the most guns, whoever has the most money, whoever has the most votes. They're the ones that dictate what's right and wrong. And who are we to say otherwise? But it's not just a box. The why behind the fight includes the fact that there was a God who acts within the universe and speaks and has given us, if you would, an owner's manual to understand how to operate government, how to operate our homes, how to operate society. And when he does so, countries flourish financially, orphans are fed and adopted, And may I say this, that when Christians were and really have been a force to be reckoned with, the why behind the fight means that we'll stop slavery on 2 continents, that we will be feeding the orphan and taking care of those who are in need. The why behind the fight becomes you have to have a real big reason behind what's worth dying for and what's worth living for. In our own particular country, the United States Constitution, let's not forget that when they signed the Declaration of Independence, these forefathers of ours, and they pledged their, and I quote, their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, they were signing their death warrant. Yes. Here was a minuscule amount of people going against the world's greatest military empire at the time. They're going to pick a fight with them. Well, King George picked a fight. But they knew the why behind what they were doing, and it was worth dying for and worth living for. And so the why behind a fight is so critically important to stay the fight, to stay what's good, what's honorable, and what's right.
I like how you did that. So let me ask you this. Where we are today in society, how does that transform the why behind the fight and where we're at today in society? What's your thoughts?
Our country has gone from being a world changer, a light upon the hill for the other nations because of our background, because our forefathers in America, and I'm sorry, we go behind the documentation. Can you envision now? I mean, we've got the documents. George Washington falling down on his face before Congress and crying out to God for help, to how to form this country. To hear all those things like that we don't see that's there. And now we have forgotten. We've gone from what I say, feeling like God's called us to be on a cruise ship, and what we've been called to do is we're called to a battleship. And so we've gotten very comfortable in an easy chair, coaching a football game from our lazy boy to actually being in the fight. And because of that, our country really has lost its entire bearings. We're lost at sea along with the citizens. And boy, the impact is very obvious as we look at what's happened in our country. We still have fantastic government. Our government is the United States Constitution, but people are pushing that aside who are in government positions and trying to transform this country into something else. And what's sad is the people who should be a force to be reckoned with, Donna, simply had not a clue. And they have forgotten who they are. It's an identity crisis in the church. I say in the opening part of the book, what has happened to our country? I'll tell you what's happened. The church has not happened. The people of God have not happened. That's why our country is where it is. I can't point fingers at other people. We have to point at ourselves and say, we're the reason. Now, let's get started. Let's wake up. And the giant is awakening. I tell you that. This sounds gloomy, but I see signs all over where the giant is waking up and starting to make a difference.
Look at Canada. Look at Canada. Look at the truckers. I mean, just watching that is so inspirational.
Yeah. So this shows you where we are, right, Donna? Is here we are applauding those Canadian background. Really, Canada's become very socialist. We've got heroes rising up in Canada. And I'm thinking, what's happened to us?
I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What about the churches? You would think, knowing history, in times like this, people would go to the churches and, kind of find some leadership. And I just feel like we're not getting it. Are you hearing that?
Oh, I am. It breaks my heart, honestly.
Lockdowns. Nobody's fighting back on lockdowns. Can't go to church.
Here's a couple things. We have forgotten both, not just our biblical history, even as pastors. They may be able to preach a good sermon, look good on a TV screen or whatever, but they have forgotten the content behind what they preach. It's not just a cruise ship that we're on. We're on a battleship. They've forgotten that. And the First Amendment was placed there under great pressure. May I say, I used to be a very strong Baptist pastor, But I'm proud of my Baptist heritage in this sense. We had put a lot of pressure onto Thomas Jefferson. And that's how we got the First Amendment, that there would be this one-way valve where the church had full rights to become the conscience of the government. But whoa, government, you cannot. That's what the First Amendment is about. You cannot come and start restricting churches. And all of a sudden, we see something like the shutdown. And, you know, we have to work and respect our government. And so in the first 2 weeks, we're all confused, all right, about what was going on during the initial COVID crisis. And so we had to step back and look at it. But then I was in Colorado on the church security team, standing in the parking lot. We had been shut down, but we've been threatened with we've been threatened by BLM. So we had a security team there, and there was no church service going on. So we're watching the property. And I look across a block away from me, Walmart's parking lot is full, packed out. Our parking lot is empty. What a sign, and I'm going to say it, what a sign of cowardice. What a sign of duplicity that we have had experienced in church.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I said the same thing. And you got Home Depot, Lowe's, everything was open but churches. And then people were stressed, scared, struggling, and no place to go. No churches. Because in my opinion, they bowed down to all these mandates.
Yes.
And look where we're at now.
And part of that, you know, one of the things that impressed the early Roman Empire about Christians, and it's written by Tacitus, and I won't go into all the details, but except to say that when the plague hit, the Christians flocked to go help the people in the plague rather than running from it. They flocked to make a difference, and they died. Many of them died from the plague. And it's so impressed, and these are the famous words by Tacitus. Oh, how those Christians love people. I thought, what's happened? What's happened?
Well,
the church has not happened.
No, but like you said, I'm starting to see this awakening. I think Canada's doing a great job. I saw with Canada, the truckers, and now Australia is now doing the same thing because they had some serious lockdowns. And so Canada's doing it. And it sounds like here in the US, they're looking, I think in March, to do the truckers to DC. So I think people are waking up and hoping the churches will join them. You've got law enforcement, nurses, military joining who have lost their jobs and fighting for their freedoms.
And I know we're kind of running out of time, and I'll just say this, that what we're fighting for is, you know, the question is who umpires over law and what's right and what's truth. And it's him that is the lawgiver. In our country, initially, would not even pass a law unless you could back it up with scripture. And so we've lost the whole understanding of absolutes in law. Where law comes from, it's derived from the scripture and from him. And so we had a very clear understanding, and our country flourished because of it. But because that's happening, and we're not brought that in, so we now have to take some very aggressive action politically. Yes, I'm a big supporter of civil disobedience whenever necessary. We've seen great strides in our country. Martin Luther King Jr., right? And so many other, we can go down the list. And so it's time for Christians to say no more. Unrighteousness, injustice, racially, whatever demographic you want to say, can no longer abide. We have drawn a line in the sand, government. Do not trespass it.
Well said. If people want to find this book, I don't know what I said again. If people want to find your book, how can they get your book?
Well, all the major distributors, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, et cetera, even don't ever use them, so I don't remember what they are. On the computer, reading it on your computer, they're all out there. They can also write to me if they wish, or speak to me. I don't know if we should put that on the podcast.
Yeah, we will get that. So your book is called Fighting Words. We'll get that out there. And then in addition, I wanted to talk about the new course you're going to put together for Point Blank here in Alaska. We have so many different students that are always looking for something new. Can you tell us what that course might be about?
Yes, the course will be giving the unheard of why behind the fight, Because when we talk about firearms, we're talking about protecting. There's a big ethical terminology that's important. There's a big difference between violence and force. So we have to know that we have to use force. That's why it's called a police force, not a police violence. We have to know why we are called to use force with guns if necessary to stop evil. So behind that, I wanted to give sort of the background, the why behind the fight when it comes to firearms, protecting ourselves, our family, our neighbors, and respecting law enforcement and our military. All that comes back from the why behind the fight. And so I want to give in this class a more detailed questions to be answered, to understand these things, to say here are the drawing lines. Where are the lines in the sand? You must choose, but choose very carefully with what kind of force you'll use. And so we talk about discretion, respect for the laws, and the use of force in particular, and self-defense by firearm. And so we're going to talk about those type of things, give them more of a why. That's missing, I think, so much in firearms training in churches, everywhere else.
I am looking forward to your class. I'm actually going to be one of your first students. I know the class will be coming March 26th. If you guys are interested in taking this new class here in Alaska, maybe eventually we can Zoom, because I know I've got friends in the lower 48 that might eventually want to Zoom in and try to watch this. But you'll go to www.pointblankak.com. Again, it's pointblankak.com. You can call our office, 907-745-1133. If you want to purchase Dr. Lewis's book, you can email us, or you can get us through the website as well. And we'll make sure that we get you in contact with Dr. Lewis Day. Thank you so much for taking the time. And your book, I mean, you guys have to get the book. I'm looking forward to the class. And I can't thank you enough for being part of the Point Blank team. We're very excited to have you in part of our family. So thank you.
Thank you. And if you want to have your world rocked, read the book, come to the class. Thank you, Donna.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.